What's up, everyone? It is a great day to rank our top 12 running backs over here at Fantasy Life ahead of the 2025 season. And accordingly, let's get right at it. Joining me today, Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. And Dwain, you agree, I agree, all of our rankers agree that Saquon Barkley is the clear-cut RB1, consensus 102 overall player behind only Jamar Chase, even with the tush push being back for at least another season. So with this in mind, other than injury, I'm knocking on wood, we never want to wish that on anyone. What scenario do you think Saquon could bust to the extent that he does not finish as a top 5 running back? Because, man, the profile looks pretty good.
It does look pretty good. What's interesting is it's probably all the same things that we talked about last year that made us say Saquon was a second-round pick and not a first-round pick. And I know people probably hate our guts for that. But here's the good news. He was going in the second round of fantasy drafts anyway, so you still got to draft him. You can't blame us for not drafting him. You can say you're an idiot. Why didn't you guys just see this coming? Saquon on a great team like the Eagles. Why wouldn't we have him in the first round of fantasy drafts? And that would be fair. But I think it's just the same things, Ian. You know, he had 45% of the carries inside the 5-yard line. So on one hand, like that's lower than what you typically see for a running back that's going to be one of the top 3 guys in the league. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs was also one of the top 3 guys in the league, and he had the same mark last year. So we had 2 running backs do it. Obviously, a little more worry about Saquon because we know that we're going to have Jalen Hurts continue to do his thing. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe some of those David Montgomery carries go his way. So it would be that. And just the fact that you do have A.J. Brown, you've got Devonta Smith, you've got Dallas Goedert. So there's not the need like what we saw previously in New York. Not as good of a team environment, but there's just not the need to try to force him targets. Now, what still wasn't bad? Like he had a 12% target share whenever you average 5.8 yards per carry. You know, you don't really have to do a lot in the receiving game. And when you play on one of the highest scoring offenses in the league and you still punch in your touchdowns, which he had 13 of last season, you know, I feel pretty good about Saquon. But if I were to say there was this way that, you know, he ultimately ended up not living up to the running back 1 overall expectation, it would be it's just the same things we talked about last year. But I think now we've seen enough to say, fine, whatever. I mean, what there's a chance. I mean, what if Saquon finishes as the running back 3, running back 4? I just don't feel like there's this scenario where we're worried about Saquon suddenly falling so far that you hate him as your first round draft pick, other than injury, which is what you mentioned. The only other thing I'll mention, Ian, before throwing it to you and getting your thoughts here, is just variance. Folks, you just have to remember that whenever you're projecting year over year in fantasy football, like the most consistent position is wide receiver. So I'm just talking about correlation here. Fantasy points per game, when you correlate them to the next year's fantasy points per game, like how predictive are they? 0.76 for wide receiver, 0.81 for tight end. When you go to running back, it drops down to 0.66. So there's more injury at the position. You know, coaches are more willing to use a rotation than what they do sometimes with the wide receiver. So there are just factors that kind of lend themselves to getting more variance in year over year production with the running back position. So but that would apply to everyone, right? We can't just say, oh, that applies to Saquon Barkley. That applies to all running backs, and we're accounting for that in our new variance logic tool.
And that's the thing when we talk about regression with these players, specifically someone like Saquon. You mentioned it, 5.8 yards per carry last season, easily a career high. Not a coincidence that happened in by far the best offensive environment of his career. But Dwayne, I think the point, again, not to be the kid who cries regression out here, but it's really hard to be that freaking good, that much better than everyone else in the National Football League. Again, all right, it's tough to do that 2 years in a row. But in Saquon's case, when you look at the offense, man, basically the continuity there is nothing to be worried about. Yes, Kellen Moore is gone, but even last year, man, he was more or less running the same offense we had seen in Philly previously. And yes, as much as Jalen Hurts is going to be a nuisance once they get to the 1-yard line, at least his team is more than fine feeding its running backs before they get to that point, because you look at it, during these 4 years since 2021 with Jalen Hurts as a starter, Eagles running backs are first in carries between the 2 and the 5-yard line. They're dead last from the 1-yard line. So again, Saquon, I know he talked about it with the Kelsey brothers on new heights even before last season. He's going to get his chance. It's going to be from the 3, going to be from the 4. Just don't get tackled out the 1. And last year, guess what? He decided to score from 50 yards out and not even make it that big of a deal. So Saquon, easy RB1. But Dwayne, I know you have at least 1 or 2 home leagues that you are very much trying to take home the championship every single year. You're picking 101. Why are we taking Jamar Chase over Saquon?
I think with Jamar, well, number one, wide receivers, right? It's more consistent year year and the way that their production works, right? It is a very talent-driven position. And we're not saying Saquon's not talented, because he certainly is, but it could come down to your scoring format. I would say, Ian, in a PPR league, you should be taking Jamar Chase. I would say in a half PPR league, things get a lot closer. If you go back and look at historically how the top 12 finishers, work out from a PPR standpoint versus a half PPR, and that full PPR scenario, man, it's way more wide receivers. It's like 70% of the top 12 players are typically wide receivers. Once you move to half PPR, it shifts a little bit more in favor of the running backs. And obviously, if you're in a standard league, it's slam dunk. Saquon or Bijan Robinson should be the first pick in your draft, not one of the wide receivers. So I'll use a little bit of an out here and say it comes down to your format. But in PPR, I am going to go ahead and take Jamar Chase, younger player. And then we also know we just get a little bit less variance for the wide receivers year over year in production.
Always got to monitor those pesky league scoring settings. But hey, we do make it easy for you over at fantasylife.com. We can basically customize any scoring setting under the sun, specifically for your league, and accordingly get the best ranks imaginable for that format. So King Saquon sitting there as RB1. Going to RB2, Dwain, I think it's going to be a pretty much consensus around the industry, because it is Falcons RB Bijan Robinson. Just had an awesome year, and I'm looking at your projections right now over on fantasylife.com, and he is projected for the second most touches in the league. So look, again, Saquon, Bijan, it's a tier of their own. Even these other guys that we're going to get to shortly, there's at least one, I wouldn't even say red flag, maybe orangish flag. But for Bijan, don't really have any issues. So why are we taking any wide receivers over him?
Yeah, again, I do think that comes down to your league scoring format, but still, I think in a full PPR, even if you wanted to take Bijan Robinson over CeeDee Lamb, you want to take him over, any of the guys, Justin Jefferson going in that range, I don't think you can necessarily say, hey, you should make a stand one way or the other. I really do think you're in a spot where, like, honestly, you can take either. The other thing that happens really is supply and demand. So if you're in a league where you have to start 3 wide receivers plus a flex, well, then like the wide receivers, you're going to have at least 3. And then quite often you're going to want to be flexing a wide receiver. So things like that could shift you more to the wide receiver over the running back. But just as far as pure fantasy points, value over replacement that you think you're going to get for the course of the season, Bijan is going to be right up there, Ian, with any of those wide receivers, especially in a league where you only have to start 2 wide receivers. Then I think it leans much more easily in Bijan's favor. The one thing we haven't had yet with Bijan, right, is that crazy massive efficiency year. Now, he was still really good last year, 4.8 yards per carry. That's well above the league average of 4.3 for starting running backs over the last 3 years. 23% missed tackles forced last year, 24% the year before. Also been explosive, 10 plus percentage of his carries that went for 10 plus yards, 14% and 11%. The league average is 9.5% over the last 5 seasons. So Bijan really a plus in every way, but he hasn't had that crazy efficiency season like what we saw from Achane 2 years ago, what we saw from Saquon last year, what we saw from Derrick Henry last year. What Derrick Henry did from an efficiency standpoint was purely crazy. But even if you don't get it, the beauty of Bijan, number one, I do think he has the underlying skill set to eventually uncork a season like that. It hasn't happened yet. But the beauty is, man, what he also gives you in the passing game. You can make an argument for Bijan, and that's why when you talk about projected touches like you did, he's going to come out ahead of even Saquon Barkley because he's not leaving the field as often on those passing downs. Now we'll see that could change a little bit this year for Saquon because Kenneth Gainwell's gone. A.J. Dillon's not going to play passing down, so that squarely means, like, can Will Shipley step into earning a larger role in the 2-minute offense? If he doesn't, like, Saquon could be actually on equal footing with Bijan as far as playing time. But last year we already saw it unfold that way. Anytime that they're throwing the ball, they really want Bijan on the field now, which was a nice switch from what we saw the year before, where sometimes Arthur Smith wasn't doing that. So I think that's a huge thing for Bijan. Young player, efficient, not leaving the field. If I were to see a way Bijan busts, like, besides injury, it's honestly, it's really hard for me to see a bust scenario. Like, something that could lower his ceiling would be, like, surprisingly, bad quarterback play. I mean, we're already talking about Michael Penix Jr. Like, I mean, we're not for sure, like, how good he's going to be. So, like, if suddenly the Falcons were an offense that, we thought was only going to score like 30 total touchdowns, 25 touchdowns on the season, that could hurt.
That said, it's a little bit insulated because the Falcons are going to apparently keep on paying Kirk Cousins for this year as things stand right now. So, less dire scenario if something did happen to Penix or he is just, downright horrible. Not saying that's going to happen, but I do think it is that pass down floor that maybe is a little bit underrated, Dwayne. I feel like if I walked outside my house here in lovely Columbus, Ohio, asked 100 strangers on the street, hey, who do you think has more receiving yards over these last 2 years? Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs? Guessing it'd be, majority going with Gibbs, but no, it actually is Bijan, third most receptions at the position as well, only behind Alvin Kamara and Breece Hall. So again, it is one of those things where I honestly, Dwayne, I'm sure someone's going to do it. They're going to try to be provocative, get out there in July and say Bijan is my RB1 because guess what? He's 5 years younger than Saquon. And honestly, other than just the Eagles offense being a heck of a lot better offensive environment and what they can do on the offensive line, it's a decent argument.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong if you take Bijan over Saquon. Like it's guys, and again, remember, just variance comes into play, and we just talked about this is the position where it happens the most. I will make one clarification, like so, 0.66 correlation in 1 year to the next. When you stay with the same team, that goes up to 0.79. So there is more stability for these top end guys that we know are going to get their roles. So Bijan certainly fits that. Saquon certainly fits that. So you got to think about them a little bit different than some of the other guys. But still, there's just enough variance at play, man, that like these are two players that are going to get plenty of touches. They're very good at what they do. Anyone that sits here and tries to pretend like, oh, one has a massive edge over the other, honestly, just hasn't played fantasy long enough, or they just don't understand how it works, man. You can be humbled, Ian. We've both had it happen. You can get humbled in these streets really quickly. Two really good players, two good situations. Like either one of them can end up being the running back one.
It really is that knowledge curve graph, the Dunning-Kruger effect. I think I got that right, Dwayne.
Oh my
where
God,
you start off with something and you're like, oh yeah, I know this. Look, it all makes sense. And you get a little bit more time in it. And then you actually realize you know absolutely nothing. But here we are, Dwayne. We've hit rock bottom and now we are slowly but surely making our way back up. Hopefully get that real, knowledge here in the game in a few short more years. So man can dream, as can our bank accounts. But moving right along, I mentioned his name a couple minutes ago, but Jahmyr Gibbs sitting there as our RB3. We also do have Ashton Jeanty as the RB4. And it's a good question here on like how much does volume go? Because on the one hand, I think everyone is fully expecting the Raiders to force feed Ashton Jeanty the ball. If he finishes the year with the most touches in the league, we would not be surprised at all. We would be surprised if that happens with Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, the Lions have a nice, Sonic and Knuckles tandem. David Montgomery is going to get his as well. But you look at last season, Jahmyr Gibbs, even before D-Monk got hurt later in the year, he was the RB5 in PPR points per game. He averaged over 30 PPR points per game the final 3 weeks with D-Mon out there. Like, that's what can happen. But why, Dwayne, why would you go Jeanty over Jahmyr Gibbs just for a little bit more volume when, again, it seems like our floor with Gibbs is still a top 5 running back, whereas with Jeanty, I don't love the scoring upside of that Raiders offense.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely questions. Like, it's just that I do believe Genty's a generational prospect, so I'm buying into what the rookie supermodel's telling us, and 100% of those prospects have gone on to be top 6 running backs in their first 3 years, and that's where you could stop me, Ian, and say, in the first 3 years, Dwayne, but can you guarantee it for me in year 1? And the answer is, you're correct, I cannot. So there is a little bit of unknown here with Ashton Jeanty, so I certainly wouldn't blame anyone going Jahmyr Gibbs. In fact, most people are taking Jahmyr Gibbs over Ashton Jeanty. The other thing that we can say is the contingency upside of Jahmyr Gibbs is running back 1, period. Over Saquon, over Bijan. Like, ultimately, you would just say he's in the same tier as them. But anytime we've gotten the scenario where we have not had David Montgomery in the lineup, man, we're talking 25 to 30 fantasy points. Like, that's, you just mark it down. Like, that's what you're getting from this dude. So that contingent ceiling is absolutely massive. So I think they belong in a tier right there together. And listen to this, Ian. So the fantasy life, variance logic actually agrees with you. Ashton Jeanty, even though I'm giving him more volume, his fantasy ceiling is 22.8 fantasy points per game. But Gibbs is right there, even though I'm projecting less volume at 22.6. Like, we're not going to sit here and say, oh, that means Genty's better. Like, they're right there. They're together. So if you want to go Gibbs over Jeanty, I don't blame anyone. If you want to go Jeanty over Gibbs, I also don't blame anyone. But I will say, to your point, there's a little more risk because of the unknown with Jeanty. But there's that clearer path to, 350 touches than what we have with Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, having said all that, what do you think of the way the Lions are going to handle the split? Because they did just re-up David Montgomery last season. Or do you think they finally seen enough in 2 years where it's like, guys, we probably do need to shift the way that we're rotating these guys, because there's also just this chance that Gibbs gets more than what I'm projecting, because I'm kind of projecting it how it's been the last 2 years, really close between the two guys. But they could just decide they want to give, Gibbs 10% more of the carries. And if they did, that would also move him past Genty.
That could happen. But man, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this Lions offense, based on what they were able to do, I don't know why they would try to, again, overload Gibbs, even though, yes, if they just, again, entered the year saying we want to score as many points as possible in week one, yeah, you feed Gibbs the rock, every single play. But that's not the case. They understand this is going to be a January, hopefully February, journey for them. And accordingly, I do think we'll continue to see things fairly well split. That said, man, even with them being split last year, 65% of Gibbs' games, man, he finished as a top 12 running back. That was the highest mark in the league. So I don't want to underestimate his floor. Really reminds me of that Family Guy meme where, Jahmyr Gibbs, he is the boat. All right. We know what we're getting. Yes, Ashton Genty could also be a boat. And guess what? I bet the package even looks like a boat. All right. Like, I'm not doubting Genty. Like, he's going to be awesome. But maybe just, again, trying to poke holes in this, because let's face it, every single really good first round, top 10 running back prospect to come out hasn't been great. Mentioned Bijan, Arthur Smith, I know, RB17 in PPR points per game. Christian McCaffrey, he was RB13. Those had to do with, again, we had Jonathan Stewart kind of splitting things up with CMC, Bijan, Tyler Algier, Arthur Smith doing their thing. But with Genty, the whole Chip Kelly thing is pulling a lot of weight here. Chip Kelly came in the Eagles, did some really fun things. That first Monday night game, Vic, LaShawn McCoy, might have been Sunday night, but the speed and everything, I get it, that was hot. It's been a while since then, all right? San Fran experiment went horrible. He spent most of the time after that at UCLA being a pretty mediocre college football coach. Yes, went to Ohio State, used a split backfield, I might add. When hasn't Ohio State scored a bunch of points in the last decade of action? So are you at all concerned, Dwain, that maybe, again, we're just being a bit too optimistic about Genty getting force-fed? Because, again, I don't see the big concern, but I've ranked Genty already this offseason between RB3 and RB7 for this reason. Like, yeah, he could be RB3. He could be RB1. I understand that, but I've seen Gibbs do it. I've seen Derrick Henry do it. I've seen Devon Achane. I've seen Christian McCaffrey. Like, what? I believe in the rookie supermodel. I'm not trying to tell you not to, but man, those are also incredible running backs. I just feel a lot better about all of their offensive environments.
Yeah, I mean, I won't blame anyone that wants to be a little bit more pessimistic about Genty, because there is still the fact, no matter what, he has not proven it, right, at the NFL level. And it could go wrong. There's going to be outliers. The longer the supermodel lives on for running backs, right, is based on the last 8 years. That's still a relatively small sample size, right? We could be doing this show in 3 or 4 years from now and look back and say, okay, players like Ashton Genty now have an 80% hit rate, right? Not a 100% hit rate. So eventually there's going to be someone that's going to end up being that outlier, and it could be Genty. So I think everything you're saying is completely fair. I think the bottom line is there really is a tier of guys here, and Genty belongs in it. And it's kind of up to you, the drafter, as to, how much you care about whether or not Genty has shown it at this level, right? We have had other players where we didn't care about it, like Zeke, and came in and they were fine. A lot of the guys that he comps to in the supermodel, they came in and they actually were fine right away in their first year. But it's definitely not a lot compared to some of these other, which we're about to talk about another one right here with Devon Achane, that you could make a similar argument around.
Speaking of Achane, what a start to his NFL career. PPR RB5 as a rookie on the back of an NFL record 7.8 yards per carry. Didn't see the same efficiency as in the sophomore campaign. Actually started to get back there second half of the year. I think that week one high ankle sprain, loss of Tua had more to do with that than anything. But guess what? Still posted a top 6 finish because no running back actually had more PPR points come from receiving than Devon Achane. So again, 2 different methods really of earning a top 6 finish. Now, God forbid, the Dolphins fix their run blocking a little bit, which you can't really get any worse. Why, Dwain? Should we say that Achane doesn't have the highest ceiling in fantasy, and does your logic actually suggest that he might?
Yeah, I mean, he has a great ceiling because he is explosive on the ground, and then he's also a major plus in the passing game. So we've been talking about quarterbacks up till now, right, on these last 2 shows, and we've mentioned, okay, guys that can actually throw the ball and run the ball give you what? More outs. Well, it's the same thing for running backs. The guys that are actually good in the rushing department, but also pluses in the passing game, they're going to be the ones that are going to have more outs. Number one, that protects you from a safety standpoint, right? Because say you land on a team that all of a sudden the Dolphins suck this year and they win 5 games and lose 12. It's not going to kill Achane time, he's now going to catch passes in these trailing game scripts. But if they just go bananas, right, and they turn back into the Dolphins offense we saw 2 years ago, we're probably going to see his touchdowns go back up, and he can still catch a lot of balls. So he just has a lot of ways to actually get to, a really good fantasy number. And whenever you rank all of the running backs and their projections, Ian, he comes out as the fourth highest ceiling of everyone. And right now he's our running back 5. So actually one spot higher than where we have him in our ranks. So yeah, I think that there's just a lot to like about Achane. The only question is if whether or not the Dolphins will want to like completely load him up or not. But last year, I mean, you don't have Raheem Mostert anymore. Last year, Jalen Wright wasn't actually like, didn't do anything to like play his way into this big role. He did start to expand his role towards the end of the year. They did spend a later round draft pick on Ollie Gordon. But again, like you've talked about, man, that's not the sort of thing that should worry you, right? About some of these really good young running backs. Whenever you have, a day 3 running back come in, we're just not going to worry too much about that. The only hype I've seen has actually been just some of the most silly crap I've ever seen in my life. Like these clips going around of the coach listing the running backs in order, and they list Jalen Wright before Devon Achane. I believe it's Frank Smith, one of the offensive coaches.
About Jalen Wright.
He was asked about Jalen Wright. Exactly. The reporter asked him, Jalen Wright. So why do we think the first name listed is Jalen Wright? Can we please stop with this crap, man? This is so stupid. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. I do like Jalen Wright as a great handcuff, potential growing role this year. But man, these people out here trying to twist these coaches' words and do it being like this this cryptic way of telling us Jalen Wright's taking over the backfield. I mean, give me a break on that. So yeah, really love Achane. I think you could actually argue Achane as high as running back 3 or in the same tier as Jahmyr Gibbs, right?
Yeah.
If you knew that the Dolphins were going to be like the Lions offense this year, like essentially I would say you have the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think they're the same player.
With Achane, last year, mentioned it, Mostert stayed relatively healthy, but wasn't the same, wasn't being featured the same. Jalen Wright didn't do much. Achane stayed fully healthy for 17 games. He left one of those with an early concussion, I believe, against the Patriots. Again, battled through the high ankle sprain, but only 203 carries in 17 games. I mean, I don't think it's a huge stretch to believe that without Mostert coming off a 20-plus touchdown season, maybe that does tick up 20, 30 carries. If the offense isn't able to better integrate those wide receivers, maybe the targets keep going. Achane actually led all running backs in targets when lined up in the slot or out wide. So even if you want to say that they're going to get back to throwing in that position more, guess what? He already gets a good amount of run there, and that is unique relative to other backs. So again, with Achane, he's actually my RB4, someone that I'm trying to draft in all shapes and sizes, because right now, Dwain, just the RB7 over at Underdog. He's going regularly in round 2. Walk, don't run. Run, don't walk to pick up Achane in round 2 of drafts of all shapes and sizes. So feeling good about Achane. Again, our consensus RB5 is someone I have even a little bit higher. Moving on to our consensus RB6, it is King Henry himself. Just got paid by the Baltimore Ravens. Shout out to them for actually giving a 30-something, year-old running back an actual nice payday for the first time in the history of the NFL. I kid. But basically, Dwain, it's one of these things where with Derrick Henry, and, I kind of wrote this when I was just going through my running back tier article, where it's like if someone came up to you and said, man, your life will be over after this football season unless you guess exactly how many touchdowns Derrick Henry is going to score. I'm probably saying 17, 18. So if that's our answer, why aren't we drafting the guy all the time?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, he's had 16 last year. He had 12 the year before that, 13 the year before that. He had 17 in 2020. So, I mean, I think somewhere what do I have him projected for right now? I think I've got him projected for 12. Again, because hey, I think it's fair. I mean, the way I work the projections is I do use the player, I use their career, their last 3 years, but then there's also a regression to the league. So yeah, I don't have him projected for 17,000 touchdowns like what Ian wants me to do, but he's still projected to be one of the top guys as far as scoring rushing touchdowns. I have him at 11, right? I've got Saquon Barkley sitting right there at 11, and again, that's the median because we're letting the variance logic really handle, okay, what could the outer, if we want to paint the edges, right, of the strike zone, what does that look like? And we let the logic really do that to give us that floor and ceiling. But I think just the big thing for me with Derrick Henry that's just so impressive, Ian, and we know that playing with Lamar Jackson helps. We've talked about this for many years, you and I, on multiple shows that we've done, what it can do for these running backs. But man, just seeing this guy come out here, he was 30 years old last year. He's going to turn 30. He'll be 31.2. You know me, I'm very technical. 31.2 years old whenever the season starts this year. But man, he came out here and ran for 5.9 rushing yards per carry, 3.5 yards after contact, which is essentially in line with his career average, 3.3, 3.6, 3.3, 3.9. So what does that tell you? That 5.9 that he now has when his yards after the contact were the same, man, that's the benefit of playing the Ravens offense with freaking Lamar Jackson. Yep. And so I just don't know how we can expect, again, I don't project him at 5.9 yards per carry because I have a regression model that handles the rushing yards per carry, but Derrick Henry ranks the highest. He gets the highest yards per carry in the model of anyone because like I just looked at it and I'm like, great, he's going to be 31 years old, which, you know, that could bring him down some, but I didn't allow it to because I was like, and they paid him. They want to bring the guy back. They're believing in Derrick Henry. So the only knock I would say on Derrick Henry, right, is he doesn't catch a lot of passes. He never has. Lamar Jackson's also very willing to take off. But again, whenever you're going to have this ceiling of touchdown upside. And the other thing is you have a ceiling, man, of a guy that could rush for 1,800, 2,000 yards. Right. And if you do that, it just the receiving stuff, honestly, it ends up not mattering as much. I will say in the model, right, as far as handling, you know, the way that the ceilings and everything work out, Derrick Henry comes in at 21.8, which is below guys that we've talked about, Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, guys that get used a little bit more in the passing game. But still, I will just tell you this. To be a running back that's not projected to catch very many balls and come in at 21.8 as your ceiling fantasy points per game in a PPR format, like it's really hard to do. Derrick Henry is just one of those guys that can do it.
And you always see him bust, you know, a screen or two anyway. I mean, he actually did have more receiving yards last year than Kyron Williams, someone who that was supposed to be a strength of his game, you know, coming out of Notre Dame back in the day. So I know the Rams don't like to use their running backs in the receiving game, but really is, again, just one of these situations where the more that I see Derrick Henry by these wide receivers that, again, aren't just a complete alphas. Like, we'll go through wide receivers here next week. Spoiler alert, everyone. But like Dwain, once we get kind of past AJB, Drake London, not even put Lab McConkey in that tier, I'm taking guys like Derrick Henry, even Jonathan Taylor's of the world, 8 days of the week, man. So you did mention that Lamar Jackson gravity effect. If you guys caught that Ravens Steelers wildcard game last year, thought the broadcast did a great job on that zone read where Lamar literally pulled 3 different defenders to the outside, giving that gaping hole for King Henry to go ahead and do his thing. So again, a situation where I do have Derrick Henry ranked ahead of Ashton Genty, same tier, 100%. But yeah, overall RB6, team fantasy life, feeling good about that. Also feeling pretty good about maybe, you know, Dwain, over Memorial Day weekend, enjoying a couple nice cold Bud Lights.
Hey, you know you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
Taking the running backs here on today's Fantasy Life Show, 1 through 6. Yeah, some pretty freaking great players. And yet, Dwain, we have not mentioned the all-time NFL leader in PPR points per game at the position, Christian McCaffrey, RB7. Not me. Couldn't be me. I got him RB5, right, just to be clear. But this man is available in the early parts of round 2. I've seen it with my own eyes, Dwain. If we see CMC in round 2, give me one good reason why we should not click draft every single time.
Yeah, the only reason is people are going to be worried about him getting hurt, right? It's the recency bias of what happened last season. But whenever you re-rank everything by ceiling points, Christian McCaffrey goes into the same tier as Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson. He skips the tier with Devon A. and Ashton Genty, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Derrick Henry, and moves into that very top tier. So if you were just trying to make that big swing in round 2, if Christian McCaffrey is healthy, plays all season, It's going to be great, Ian. And so listen to the median projections I gave him, because some people are going to be like, you probably got him projected too high. I mean, I really went back and looked at what he's done with the 49ers, what he did a little bit before that with the Panthers. But I mean, I've got him at 63 rushing yards per game. I've got Bijan at 77 for his median. I've got Saquon at 93. I mean, I've got those guys way ahead of CMC. I've got CMC, if you look at his rushing touchdowns, 0.5 per game. I've got Saquon Barkley at 0.68, way above that. Derrick Henry, we just talked about, 0.73. So not like just coming out here and saying, oh, man, McCaffrey's a lock to score 15 rushing touchdowns. Now, that gives him a ceiling of 0.8 per game, which would be really good. But here's where it really gets interesting, man. It's hard to hold this dude down in the passing game, Ian. I got him projected for almost 4 receptions per game, which is definitely the highest of all the running backs that we're going to talk about today. And that's 31.7 receiving yards per game. And once you start working the math on the different ways that CMC could get to a ceiling across his rushing and what he does as a receiver, man, it just puts him in this very top tier. His ceiling fantasy points come out to 24, even though his median projection is a 17.4. So, I mean, look, he is just one of these guys that's going to come down to how do people feel about him, and from an injury standpoint, going to be 29 years old when the season starts. Looking at the way running backs age, he's still in a spot where you would consider him not on the decline. That's what we would call the post-prime area, not in his prime years, but in post-prime. And we've seen guys, Derrick Henry is a key example. Saquon Barkley, we've got good examples of these guys in their post-prime years, right? Really like 27 to 29 years old. They can still put up, numbers that were as good as what they were whenever they were in their prime. And that's where CMC's at, man. And so when I look at him and you think pure ceiling, like what you said, I kind of hat tip to you, man, like how high you're ranking him, because like I have thought, like, do I have him too low? I will tell you this. I've drafted CMC more than any other player right now on Underdog. Every time I get to like what you said at the beginning of round 2, it's like, I take CMC. And if I don't, I take HN. But HN falls a little bit further than CMC.
You could actually argue he's set up better than ever without Debo there to actually take away some carries and some of those underneath targets. And I know you're also very high on George Kittle. I don't think CMC is going to get all those Debo targets, in the lower ADOT areas of the field, but I bet he gets a good chunk of them. Him and Kittle really are looking like, again, the leaders of a 49ers offense that more years than not has been near the top of the league. So again, the injury stuff does matter. I'm not trying to deny that, but I've said this before, guys. I do think when we talk about players being injury prone, it becomes this binary. You either are or you aren't, when no, that's not the case. All right. Jonathan Taylor has actually missed more games due to injury than Christian McCaffrey over the course of these past 3 seasons. All right. Now we'll talk about JT in a second. I'm not saying that, 2 guys that have both missed 14 plus games. Yeah, I understand that they are probably more injury prone than your average Bijan Robinson sort of running back. But again, is that discrepancy really wide enough between them? I don't think so. And you can actually listen to learning doctors who agree. Dwain, you actually tweeted out some of that workload stuff, and we had friend of the show, Jeff Mueller at JMThrivePT on Twitter. Great follow. He actually said, I will be betting on Christian McCaffrey this season, but that's just me, the injury guy. Jeff's always, got a few jokes in there, but also just brought up the Achilles tendonitis, the stem cell treatment that McCaffrey got. That was something George Kittle actually got, back around 2020, 2021. Hasn't had any issues since. So again, it's one of these situations which is based on what we know. Hey, injuries are going to happen. Balls are going to bounce the wrong way. But man, if God forbid those injury gods give us a break here with Christian McCaffrey, probably going to do what he usually does, and that is break fantasy football. So our RB7 overall. Looking forward to seeing your updated ranks after this show, Dwain, with him even higher.
Go look at my week 1 projections, and you'll get excited about CMC, right? And when we're just not worried about an injury at all, like CMC grades out as the top running back on the slate for week 1 from a projection standpoint. The dude's ridiculous. I know that there's, we talked about the injury stuff, but man, the ceiling is absolutely sky high.
Week 1 projections already done in May. Kudos to you, my friend. But let's move on to our RB8, and that is Mr. Jonathan Taylor, who I think if you just asked anyone about Jonathan Taylor, the first thing their memory is going to go to is, the time against the Broncos when he unfortunately, dropped the ball right before the goal line. Would have been a lot cooler if he scored there. I'm sure some of you have some painful stories about, again, just getting bounced from your fantasy playoffs because of that direct play. That said, this dude just ran for over 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns in only 14 games last season. Dwain, Jonathan Taylor is the 5th leading rusher in NFL history in terms of rushing yards per game at 89. More than Derrick Henry, more than freaking Walter Payton out here, all right? This dude, when he is healthy, is among the very best running backs in the league. We just haven't really seen him be healthy. Last time we did, it was 2021. And what did he do? He finished as the RB1 overall. 2022, grade 2 ankle sprain in week 4, season-ending ankle sprain in week 15. 2023 had the back injury that might have been contract-related, also tears his thumb ligament in week 12. Even last year, man, grade 3 high ankle sprain in week 4 that caused him to miss some games, and then who's to say what percentage he was actually back healthy at by the time he decided to return. So Jonathan Taylor going in round 2, I mean, if you had to try to do who could be this year's Saquon Barkley, the round 2 running back who never should have been going that late. I know it seems like there's a few of them because we talked about CMC and HM, but JT deserves to be in that conversation too.
Yeah, I think the reason we would take CMC and HN over him in the conversation is because we see a ceiling for their offense. And that's the big question right now for Jonathan Taylor. Everything else you said is 100% correct. Essentially, this is Derrick Henry not playing in as good of an offense. And that's no disrespect to King Henry. King Henry's still like on his own pedestal. The dude is absolutely amazing. But JT, I'm just telling you, if you put him in the Ravens, like say in 2 years from now, Henry's fine, he's made all his money, and they decide to sign JT, right? And he's at that similar age at where Henry was at the time. Jonathan Taylor, assuming that Lamar Jackson's still healthy and can do what he can do to defenses, he's going to put up like very similar numbers to what we're getting with Derrick Henry. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to see that play out. Now, theoretically, you would think it could, because if Anthony Richardson were somehow, that's the out, man. If Anthony Richardson, and I know the odds are not high on this, but if he were able to suddenly turn into this dual threat quarterback that could also operate and keep the team out of long down and distances, hit some of the shorter check down stuff, not just be this like, I'm either running the ball for 30 yards or I'm heaving a ball down the field, but ask me to do anything outside of that and I'm going to struggle. Like, he's got a lot of areas of his game that he has to fix, but that would be the out, in my opinion, Ian, that would suddenly, if we were to look up and say JT is the running back 1 overall, it would be, oh man, look at what the Colts did with their run game in the offseason. Anthony Richardson got good enough as a passer to keep them out of these scenarios, right, where they were in 3rd and longs. They were able to stay on the field more, able to score more points, and then that upped the ceiling for JT. And they were able to do more things like what Baltimore does with Lamar Jackson, as far as getting defenses so worried about Anthony Richardson in the run game that you're giving JT these wide open runways. We did see some of that last year. We just didn't get to see it for really long, consistent stretches. So I think that would be the out that would do it. Unfortunately for me, like, it's just hard to project that kind of leap for Anthony Richardson, but it's somewhere in there. It's somewhere in the range of outcomes. So it's just really due to, not having an offense that is strong as the others. And obviously the one other thing is the fact that he's just not going to get used a lot in the passing game, especially when Anthony Richardson's under center. Daniel Jones gets out there, you might get a little bit more going, to JT, from a standpoint of checkdowns, but still JT's never been like this super high end target earner in the passing game. And the Colts do have multiple other guys that they like to get the ball to down the field. So really more one-dimensional, right, than we talked about with HN and some of the other guys.
I do wonder if we could see almost a Kenneth Walker sort of receiving season from JT. I understand Taylor is not the class of the NFL in terms of what he does as a receiver, but he had 3 games last year with a snap rate north of 90%. I mean, they are willing to just leave him out there literally every down. Some games that we see it go by. Khalil Herbert and DJ Giddens, Tyler Goodson. Yes, those are guys that could come in on pass downs. Again, we have seen in the past, most notably with Nyheim Hines a few years ago, but man, that is a weak depth chart behind Jonathan Taylor. And again, really is a guy where he could push for 400 combined carries and targets with good health. Yes, heavy majority of those are going to be carries, but man, that is a lot of volume to potentially have on your plate in round 2.
JT's playing plenty of the passing down work. He just doesn't get the targets because you get the rushing. Now Flacco did give him a little bit more, but I mean, JT had an 80% snap share last season, right? So that's for guys that played at least 250 snaps on the year. That was the second in the league behind only Kyron. Like, he's not leaving the field. I mean, long down and distance, playing about half the snaps, but getting almost 60% of the 2-minute offense. He stays out there inside the 5. So I mean, JT, like, as far as like the expected workload from how often he's going to be on the field, I don't think we have any worries there. And to your point, if he were playing with a quarterback that was willing to check it down a little bit more to the running back, I do think he could have that Kenneth Walker-esque, what we saw early on in the year from him. Like, he could have that kind of range of outcomes.
It's a profile that 15 years ago would be a no doubt round one player. Now, I like to think I've evolved personally over the last 15 years. Not saying that that's a reason why we now need to draft the guy in the top 12 picks. But again, I've been clicking his name a lot there in the middle parts of round two, especially again, when you do happen to find yourself in a position where you're taking a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, whoever in round one and missing some of those other running backs. So good stuff with JT at RB8. This is about the line, Dwayne, where I do think we start to see more pronounced, potential red flags for the players. Okay. Not saying they aren't there for Jonathan Taylor, but man, even if Richardson still kind of sucks and Daniel Jones is, kind of doing Daniel Jones things, we're still talking about 300 plus touches for Jonathan Taylor. It's just really hard for running backs to bust with that much volume. Josh Jacobs ran very, very hot last year. He was good, great, I'll even say, for the Packers and everything. What he did was fantastic, really did prove that 2023 season with the Raiders seemingly was, more just him being mad about the contract situation. It was a bad offensive environment. Jacobs with the ball in his hands continues to be one of the better running backs in the league, but I'm just worried that A.J. Dillon being gone with a neck injury. Oh, stop laughing at me, okay? I know it's A.J. Dillon. Matt LaFleur gave him 200-plus touches 3 straight years before that with Aaron Jones, all right? Laugh at Matt LaFleur if you want, not me. Matt LaFleur gave Deion Lewis 214 touches in 2018, gave another guy, Derrick Henry, 230, okay? Dillon was out of the picture. 3rd-round pick, Marshawn Lloyd, played 1 game because of ankle and hamstring injuries, all right? Manuel Wilson, these guys, we can talk about what the pecking order is going to be. I understand A.J. Dillon's now out of the picture with the Eagles, but in your heart of hearts, Dwayne, do you think the Packers entered last season wanting to give Josh Jacobs 337 touches, or is that a bit more of an injury, induced situation than maybe we're giving it credit for?
I think it could be either. We've also heard, from Matt LaFleur that they did want to load Josh Jacobs up. Early in the season, Josh Jacobs was getting the workload and he really wasn't producing. That made him a great buy low in fantasy, which is something that we talked about early last year. It ended up working out because eventually the fantasy points did follow. But the main point there is the fact that even though it wasn't working, the team stuck with him. And then, of course, he did ultimately start really producing in a big way. So I was a little more leery with Josh Jacobs. So for JT, some of these other guys we talked about, typically I don't project the most I'll project is 67, 68% of the rushing attempts to one player. So I did not give Josh Jacobs that treatment. I had to keep him a little bit lower than that just because there is that potential risk like you talked about with Matt LaFleur. But I didn't bury him either. I wasn't just oh my God, I'm so worried about this that I'm just, scared to project him anywhere near those guys. So I ended up, putting Josh Jacobs at 62%. So I didn't put him in that, elite tier, but I still kept him in the really good tier.
Okay.
And he was sitting right at 60% last year. I do think Marshawn Lloyd is the potential fly in the ointment. He was just hurt all year, like you mentioned. So he's a guy that they felt good enough about to spend a 3rd round. I think it was a 3rd round draft pick they spent on him last year, or what is my 3rd or a 4th. But Marshawn Lloyd is a guy that's very different than Josh Jacobs, right? He's this guy that is a more explosive kind of, shifty player versus Josh Jacobs, more of a no nonsense, gets downhill, does his thing, really good inside the 5-yard line. So I think they could be complementary to one another. And that is something that we've seen from Matt LaFleur whenever he has had 2 players that were very complementary to one another. He has been willing to mix them up. You already mentioned some of the pairings. Aaron Jones to go with A.J. Dillon. We can go back to Derrick Henry as well whenever we had Deion Lewis. So we've got a few different examples there. So that's why I didn't go as high, on Josh Jacobs as the other guys. But I do think he's probably fairly priced in drafts. I do think you've hit a tier break, though, to your point. I think after you pass JT, you've now hit a tier break.
RB9 consensus ranks. He's my RB9 overall. Again, it's more so where does he fit in the bigger picture of things? Because personally, Dwayne, again, when we do have Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Drake London, A.J. Brown, Lab McConkey, those 2 elite tight ends and kind of the last remaining top 10 wide receivers that it's just really hard to poke a hole in any of their profiles, I'm leaning towards those guys over Jacobs, all right? If I'm in a situation where I've already taken 2 wide receivers, I want to get a hero RB in round 3 and Jacobs is still there, okay, that's fine. Not out on the guy. We all have him ranked top 10 for a reason, but again, this is the point where I have enough concern that I probably would, again, take a long look at some of those pass catchers as well.
The one upside thing I would say for Jacobs is that I think you and I would both agree, heading into the season, obviously anything can happen, but we definitely like the Packers offense better than the Colts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that kind of keeps them close is that people are acknowledging Jacobs is part of this offense that we probably want pieces in. The Colts, we really like Jonathan Taylor, the player, but we're really not sure like how the offense is going to work out, even though we think he's going to get his touches. So it's just two slightly different flavors. But I think they're still, they deserve to be pretty close in the ranks. I give a tier break because I'm not as worried about JT's workload. Also think JT is a little bit of a better player than what we have with Jacobs, but I could see Jacobs easily outscoring JT because of the offense that he plays in. Like if Marshawn Lloyd doesn't come on to press him for touches, we like what the Packers can do.
Let's move on to our RB10. It is rising second-year talent, Bucky Irving, fresh off. Again, just a really impressive season. You turn the film on, and you probably are not going to find many mixtapes that were better. This dude is an absolute demon in the open field and some of the things he can do. That said, Dwayne, listeners of the show should know all about your utilization score. Again, just kind of a one-stop metric to help sum up a player's entire workload. And very surprising to see Bucky Irving finish as the RB29 last season. Now, Rachaad White, fourth quarter fumble against the Cowboys, really put him in the doghouse. Bucky takes over week 18 and then into the wild card game with his biggest snap counts of the season. It would also make sense for the Buccaneers realize, as I think everyone else does, hey, Bucky's our best running back. We should be featuring him more often into 2025. That's all great, but man, we are taking a leap of faith here as that workload goes, and it's not going to be pretty if, again, we use a late second, early third round pick on Bucky Irving, and we're sitting here in week 1 next year, and it's still a split backfield.
Yeah, to me, though, this is the same thing that we were arguing about last year with Achane. And we were proponents of Achane. And so I want to be a proponent of Bucky Irving. Historically, whenever you have young running backs like this that perform that well, like typically they're going to keep on being good, right? Now, we can't always exactly like efficiency doesn't always lead to more touches, but he kind of already took over. Like coming out of the bye week, they really had it in their head. They were going to go to him. Then he got a concussion or he had an injury. I can't remember what it was. I think it was a concussion in like week 11 or something like that. But week 14, he got knocked out of a game. But week 13, he had 64% of the rushing attempts. Week 15, he was coming back from an injury, so it was 38%. But then here are the rest of the healthy games: 70%, 49%, 60%, 68% of the rushing attempts. So I think he's going to be somewhere between 55 and 60%. The other thing that I really look at, Ian, is like the fantasy points per game: 27.5 in week 13, got hurt in week 14, playing injured in week 15, coming back from the injury, 13.3, week 16, 18.2, week 17, 23 fantasy points. 10.4 in week 18. Like, yes, you can still have a down week. Week 19, obviously your playoffs were over, but like we still want to look at it from a data point. That's the wild card game. 16.3 fantasy points. So, man, 15.9 per game once they basically decided Bucky was their guy. They didn't really change their running back room this offseason. So I've got him slotted in right now for 55% of the rushing attempts in the projections. So I haven't said, he's automatically taking it all over. I've kept it a scenario where Rachaad White's still getting some of it. Sean Tucker's also still getting a little bit. But it also wouldn't surprise me if he did get 60, 62, 63% of the rushing attempts this season. So I left some room again for really our ceiling and floor logic to handle those cases. And I tried to really project more where I thought the median might be. And so I feel really good about Bucky. I think he's a plus in the passing game. Like he's not like elite in the passing game, but he's plus. He had a 21% targets per route run last year. Not necessarily running all these things down the field, Ian, but a guy that, you get him just get him a little bit of room behind the line of scrimmage, man. And this guy can really work some magic as far as making that first guy miss and making sure that he is getting those extra yards. So I really want to lean into Bucky. Again, I feel like he is this year's Achane. I feel like, going in the same exact spot Achane was last year, which was end of round 2, beginning of round 3. I'm taking Bucky Irving over Josh Jacobs. I have Bucky Irving as my running back 9. I have him one spot ahead of Josh Jacobs. And you could say I'm a moron for that. And you could end up being right, but I just want to lean. I just feel like the upside of the Bucs offense overall and plus the player of Bucky Irving, those two things combined, I really like.
I think the Achane comp is a really good, just way of looking at it. Now, no Liam Cohen, but that said, man, I've been kind of poking fun at this all offseason. We always have these who's going to play the Mike Evans role now in the Jaguars offense? It's Mike freaking Evans. Can we stop with this already? We've had the Cooper Kupp role thing for all these years. And, it's like the idea that Liam Cohen was the reason why Bucky Irving was able to break 5 tackles on a run while he was reversing field against NFL defenses. Again, just doesn't make much sense to me. So last thing I'm going to leave you with, Dwayne. Each one of these running backs has a different reason why it didn't work out, but it's still a pretty damning list, all right? 7 rookie running backs drafted rounds 4 through 7 or were undrafted, so a day 3 player or undrafted, have actually been a top 24 player as a rookie in the last 10 years. Bucky was one of them. The other ones, Dameon Pierce, Elijah Mitchell, James Robinson, Philip Lindsay, Jordan Howard, Carlos Williams with a K. Shout out. It's not a good list. I think they all had different reasons. Injuries, James Robinson and stuff had things to do. Guess what? The Bucs backfield did not change.
Also
it's still
an
just him,
undrafted
White,
free
and Tucker.
agent.
Yeah. But man, it's not great. It's not great. We can agree on that.
Yeah, and I think that was people's concern last year with Kyren Williams, even though he was going into year 3. Essentially, year 2 was his rookie year because he was hurt most of year 1. So people were really worried about with Kyren. Now, did Kyren necessarily burn the world down with how well he played last year? No, but the Rams stuck with him. So when I look at Bucky Irving, I just, he's too close to what we saw with Achane and how good he played. So when I think back to some of those other names like Jordan Howard, I mean, he was a plotter that we saw kind of, in an offense where it all worked out. I'm not going to sit here and try to make an excuse for all those players because to your point, there is a risk. But I think the other thing that you have to go back and look at is what competition did the team add after those players had those seasons, or was there an injury? And in a lot of those cases, I do think there was a potential upgrade. I can't remember on all of them, but Bucky Irving, I feel you, but I'm sticking with it, man. I think he's great and the end of round 2, he's a name I want to keep clicking on.
And I also have him as a top 10 running back. So trying to bring up some potential issues, but at the end of the day, I am with you.
You got to play devil's advocate.
Got to, man. Got to. Let's talk about Kyren Williams. You just brought up. He is the Fantasy Life consensus RB11. Look, over the past 2 seasons, the only running backs who have scored more PPR points per game than Kyren Williams, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Jahmyr Gibbs. All right. We can talk about, oh my gosh, remember that whole ridiculous punt return thing going on? Yes, I agree. That was a stupid reason to fade Kyren last year. That said, they brought in Blake Corum, round 3 pick last season. Then they had Jarquez Hunter, maybe has a bit more explosiveness than either player this season. And the reason why that matters is because Kyren Williams was really bad last year in any of these efficiency stats that you want to try to use to sum up running backs. Now, as we found out with Saquon, with Josh Jacobs, with all these guys, Derrick Henry, when you switch teams, guess what? Sometimes those numbers don't mean anything. But my God, Dwain, it was horrible. 25th or worse. Yards per carry, yards after contact per carry, tackles avoided, explosive run rate. He fumbled 6 times. It was really bad, but doesn't even matter when Sean McVay still apparently loves him.
Yeah, look, and it's really one of these weird things, and I think a lot of fantasy analysts, not just us, whatever you want to call us, just two dudes having fun talking about football. We see these sort of things and we don't understand, why wouldn't you take some of the workload from Kyren Williams? When I say when you see these things, 2.7 yards after contact, right? The average running back in the NFL is 2.95, so you're well below that. If you look at his missed tackles forced per attempt, sitting at 16%, so the league average is 17%. Explosive rush rate, 9%, so those are your carries of 10 plus yards or more. The league average is 9.5%. You would just think that so basically, Kyren is a league average to below average running back that continues to get all this volume. And you would think that you would want to shift some of that volume away. The really weird thing is, and I've researched this, and I really was hoping to find something different, guys. But sometimes you just got to follow the data. Bad seasons from an efficiency standpoint do not correlate strongly to losing touches the next year. The opposite is also true. Very strong efficiency, and say you had a little bit of a smaller workload and maybe you were playing behind a bad efficient player, also didn't tend to lead to more. Exactly. Jaylen Warren didn't lead to more touches the following season. Now, we don't know all the reasons behind it, but I think we have some guesses, which is there are a lot of things that coaches care about that don't go in our fantasy spreadsheet. Right? What a running back does when they're carrying the ball, the targets they're demanding, those sort of things. So whether it comes down to pass protection, whether it comes down to the way their teammates feel about them, who knows? There's all these different things that go into team building and how these players ultimately get their playing time. And there's no way we can sit here and answer it exactly. But what we can say is there are things that influence playing time for running backs that we are not capturing in our spreadsheets. And so that Kyren's one of these guys. Could it go the other way for him? I think the door's certainly open. They did spend draft capital on another running back for 2 years in a row. I think that's the strongest signal you have, is that they have spent a pick on a running back 2 years in a row, and Kyren has not been playing that well these last 2 seasons. So I think it's certainly open, but it's hard for us to just say, hey, Kyren's going to have his demise. And you see it so much out there. Man, Kyren's not good. He's going to lose his role. Like, the data just really doesn't support that narrative. You would think that it would, but it just doesn't. So I will tell you, Ian, I have a problem clicking on Kyren, even though I know this. Even though I know this and I've done the research, like, I don't get super excited to click on Kyren. I do think it could go wrong. I do think that Kyren plays in a good enough offense. You now add Devontae Adams. Like, he is one of these guys, and he scored 14 rushing touchdowns last year. He scored 12 the year before. Like, I mean, we're just talking about a guy that, like, his spike season might be 16, 17 rushing touchdowns. And that's going to be somebody that's very valuable in fantasy, but I don't find myself picking him very often.
In his defense, Rams have drafted a running back in 8 consecutive seasons. So, yes, I know Jarquez Hunter has, some truthers out there. He's good, but they kind of tend to do this over there in Los Angeles. And as bad as those efficiency numbers were last year, guess what? They were a lot better in 2023. And I do think there's, an idea where, Kyren probably does do the little things that, just idiots like Dwain and I just are not going to be able to pick up, as well as, professional RB coaches in the NFL. So Kyren's someone where, hey, man, if he was going round 1, round 2, no, I'm not going to be clicking his name at all. But round 3, even sometimes the early parts of round 4, he is the sort of running back where, again, you found yourself, you got a wide receiver, you got a tight end. You need to try to find someone who, in a good season, could replicate that success from a running back you would have to draft in the top 10 or top 15. Kyren could be that guy because guess what? He's kind of already been him over these last 2 years. So, Dwayne, let's close out again our top 12 running back rankings with someone who was really great for certain portions of last year. Unfortunately, not in the fantasy playoffs when it mattered. Texans RB1 Joe Mixon. Now he is one of several players who, again, had that early season injury. Maybe didn't give him enough credit for playing through that high ankle sprain he suffered in week 2. Also, I mean, I'm not a doctor, Dwayne, but I do think that if we're blaming the entire season of CJ Stroud's demise, by the way, finished as the QB 28 in fantasy points per game. That was kind of wild. We blamed it on Bobby Slowick. We blamed it on the offensive line. I would kind of think those two things also impacted Joe Mixon. So, end of the day, you're doing your projections. This sure looks like an offense that, hey, we at least did see in 2023 can score points at a high level. We see in 2024, they trust Joe Mixon to be their workhorse 3-down running back. So, Joe Mixon in round 4 sometimes, man, I think I'm in there.
Yeah, and that's the thing I was going to say. With Mixon, you're getting the discount that you're not getting on some of these other players. So if you wanted to say, like, okay, Mixon at the discount you get versus Josh Jacobs in round 2 or round 3, right? Mixon versus what we're talking about with Kyren Williams, in round 2 or round 3. I think that's really what it ultimately comes down to. Right now, over on Underdog, Mixon's going pick 51. Josh Jacobs going pick 25. So 2 rounds later that you're getting Mixon. And I know, like we've liked to talk about, just because you can get someone similar at a later discount doesn't always mean you shouldn't take the other guy. But you do want to try to find these sweet spots where you can find something similar later in the draft. And I do think that Joe Mixon is pretty close, Ian, to what we have with Kyren Williams and with Josh Jacobs. I mean, if you look at Mixon, his value over replacement, which isn't necessarily the thing you care about the most for best ball guys, but we're talking a lot about season long. A lot of you folks are playing in season long leagues. And we do care more about value over replacement there. 52 points. Right. And assuming a league that has 3 starting wide receivers, 2 running backs, and 1 flex spot, Kyren Williams is at 58, and then Josh Jacobs is at 60. So we're talking about a guy that's within 8 points of those 2 players, and he's going 25 to 20 spots later in drafts. So that makes Joe Mixon, in my mind, he's a player we want to target. There are certainly red flags, like he's got a lot of mileage on him. He is a player that's getting up there in age. We do have some questions about the Texans, as far as an offense. But overall, I'm with you. I think there are reasons that we can be just as optimistic as pessimistic. Like, I think you could really paint the Texans offense really in either light. So From a Mixon standpoint, man, if he was going earlier in drafts, it would be tougher. But where he goes, it's the price that's really making Joe Mixon so valuable, in my opinion. I think the name that people are having to struggle with is, like, do you want him or do you want Chase Brown, like a younger guy who's got his own questions? Like, I know we'll talk about some more of those guys on the next show, but the big thing for me with Mixon is price.
Last point with Joe Mixon. It's the offseason, Dwayne. This is the time for arbitrary cutoffs that don't exactly make sense, but we throw them out there anyway. Weeks 1 through 14 last year, only Saquon averaged more PPR points per game than Mixon, again, before those fantasy playoffs. But don't worry about those. Let's keep those rose-tinted glasses on during the offseason. So, mentioned Chase Brown, James Cook, Breece Hall, plenty of other running backs we didn't get to. Good thing we have another running back show on tap tomorrow to, again, get to more of the sleepers, breakouts, non-top 12 running backs of the world. So, we appreciate you tuning in today, though. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for checking out the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.